What's up, everyone? I'm Sam from Team SunnyDaze, and this is the Izzet Prowess guide. Instead of doing a write-up, I decided to try something new and do a video explaining some of the main points of contention that people have with this deck, with my builds, etc. The first point is the Opt instead of the Serum Visions. I believe Opt is significantly better because although it doesn't allow you to keep creatureless hands as easily, it is a lot better in a lot of the control matchups against decks where you want to be holding open Vapor Snag and Spell Pierce like Tron and Shadow. It's great at letting you find a card that specific turn when you have 3 mana. On the turn you're going Swift Spear, Opt, try to find a burn spell. It just you dig a lot deeper, and it's just a lot more flexible than Serum Visions. The Scry 2 is decent, but because of the threat density of this deck, I think the Scry 2 from Serum Visions is a lot more negligible than the utility that Opt can gain you. Another point of contention is actually the mana base. Most people play 18 lands. I prefer 19 lands, but in reality it doesn't actually matter because the land that most people have cut is this Fiery Islet. And the 4th Fiery Islet, it's very flexible, obviously, because it's a cantrip land. It doesn't really change the math of how your mana base works. It just makes your deck a little cleaner. It allows you to keep a wider range of hands, because usually this Islet is another copy of Opt or Light Up the Stage. I only play 6 of these cantrip-esque cards, but I just play an Islet over it. I think being able to keep 3 landers is powerful. Because, like, in the mirror, you don't really want to run your Stormring out on turn 2 unless you have a Mutagenic Growth or a Dart in your bin. Being able to have 3 lands in place, you can go Morphos Entity into leaving open, like, an Opt or a Dart or whatever. Another reason why Opt is great. 19 lands is pretty necessary for having this deck be good in the mirror. The rest of the mana base is pretty standard. Just 5 fetches, mountains, 2 steam vents. Some people like to put the 3rd steam vents over a mountain, but it doesn't really matter. This deck can function without blue pretty easily. You have a lot of red spells, you have the 4 Morphos, so you're fine. You don't really need the 3rd steam vents. You just lose a lot of equity in the mirror, and it gets burned when you bring it in. The only downside is against control. If they can Field of Ruin away your steam vents, you're left with mountains and Fiery Islets that you really want to be cantripping in the matchup anyway. So it can get tough as you go into the late game. Like, unless you just have a hand where you just draw 2 Spirebluff Canals, you can sort of get screwed by that aspect of Field of Ruin control decks. Something I almost forgot. I just think it's correct, so I don't even really think about it as something that is a point of contention, but Wild Slash over Burst Lightning. I don't understand why people like Burst Lightning. In this deck, you almost never get to 5 mana, and if you do, something went horribly wrong. Either you're playing it, like, obviously Burst Lightning is going to be better against Blue-White, but I think this deck's Blue-White matchup is so good, and there's no reason to be trying to go late in the matchup anyway. Your early game against Blue-White is really good. They don't really have great answers to your Spirits and Soulscar Mages, aside from Path to Exile, which allows you to go sicko mode with like Sprite Dragon plus 3 spells very quickly. It's kind of not fair. So I don't really consider Blue-White a matchup that I have to heavily tech for. So the only upside to Burst Lightning over Wild Slash is in the mirror and against other grindy mid-range decks. But those, because of the configuration of my sideboard where I have Vapor Snag and Bonecrusher Giant, I'm not really worried about getting to 5 mana. I just want to be a bit more aggressive against the grindy decks by Vapor Snagging their Tarmogoyf, whatever, and then using Bonecrusher Giant to kill a Swift Spear and play a 4/3 shitter. I'm putting a lot of pressure on my opponent pretty quickly, so there's no reason to try to get to 5 mana. And the application of Wild Slash against the main 2 decks are Death and Taxes with Giver of Runes, and more importantly, Heliod with Auriok Champion. If you attack with a Swift Spear and they block with the Auriok Champion, you can just go Lava Dart, Wild Slash, Growth, Wild Slash, and then the Auriok Champion dies. Same with Forge Tender in that matchup, but typically those decks have been cutting Forge Tender as of late. Now let's move on to the sideboard. Soulguard Lantern is mainly just for Dredge. Dredge can be a pretty difficult matchup if you don't have the counter spells. Like you want to bring in the Spell Pierce and the Gust and the Soul Guide. This is what you do in the matchup. Soul Guide is better than Tormod's Crypt because they like to bring in Leyline of Sanctity against you, and Crypt doesn't do anything. I lost playing for top 8 of the last challenge because I had a 1-1 split of Crypt Lantern, and I just died. So I just decided to be an adult, put in the second Lantern. A little slower, but what can you do? This slot can also reasonably be Surgical Extraction, but I don't really like having Surgical because there's just so many cards in the matchup that you have to deal with. Like, you want to be Surgicaling Narcomoeba because that's just a blocker for the way you're winning, and like you typically want to be attacking in the air in the deck. So being able to Surgical Narcomoeba is fine, but then they just have Conflagrate and they have Ox to get them extremely far ahead with Creeping Chills. So you just want to be able to hit their graveyard with a one-shot effect, which is why I choose Soulguard Lantern as my card of choice. Vapor Snag is another thing that people have been picking up on. It's just really good against all the shadow decks. And it's also a good tech card against Heliod. Being able to Vapor Snag their Auriok Champion and get in with some damage with your Spears and Soulscar Mages is also pretty impactful. Sometimes they have trouble getting white down. That one of their main ways is with Horizon Canopy. So if you're able to force them to use Horizon Canopy over and over, it can be pretty taxing on them. And Vapor Snag is just a great card. You also bring it in against Tron. Speaking of what you bring it in against, the next thing I want to be doing is going over some of the sideboard choices. Some of the main points of contention that I want to go over with how I sideboard in the deck is I want to start with Tron. I have found a lot of success bringing in